Okay, then I would like to ask a question to our keynote speaker first, to Stefan. And so Stefan presented us with a complex workflow for querying a knowledge graph. And there are lots of moving components. It's quite detailed, and I imagine a lot of work went into this. And my immediate question would be, how does it compare to simply using an LLM off the shelf? Have you looked into using LLMs for the same tasks? And how about using, for example, OpenAI's LangChain workflow package to integrate with LLMs? Do you have any experience how this compares and whether or not this would work with LLMs as well? Or can you say anything about that? Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm on mute. So that's an excellent question, and actually we are playing with that at the moment in the company, experiencing with the LLMs. The main difference we have with KBQA compared to LLM is that the answer we provide using our system, it's reliable, it's transparent, we know where it comes from, and people can really rely on the answers. Whereas LLMs, they can hallucinate. It's hard to manage the amount of context they have. They can get data from somewhere, you don't know where. So it's still not working that well. It's on the user side, sure, it's very much user friendly, but when it comes to make sure that you have the right answers and all the answers, it's not there yet. Maybe it will come, but it's tied to the structure of the LLMs. They are not done for that. They are not done to be exhaustive when they give an answer. They are not made to. They don't make sure. It's not the purpose of how they work, and especially the chat thing. So we're trying to use them, but for this particular querying, it's still not there. It's still not reliable enough to be considered.
Yeah, thanks. I think I have similar experience with LLMs, but could you imagine using LLMs just for a part of your workflow? So if you go away from using LLMs for the entire task, but use LLMs only for one step in your workflow, and then combine these steps and thereby gain more control and being able to manage the data. Do you think that's an option?
Yes, very, very much. Especially when it comes to everything to the natural language understanding. So understanding the request from the user. I think there is ground here to have a final representation and understanding of the intent and the context of all the questions the user may have asked to retrieve information from a building model. So that's this part in the first step of the workflow. I think we can definitely improve by using LLMs in terms of speed and relevance. And then for now, I don't see how we can replace the actual KBQA part that sits in the middle when we will actually retrieve data from the building model, from the digital twin. And then the last part of the workflow, of course, could be, that's already what we are doing. We have the raw data that comes from the KBQA, and then using the context of the question, the query at the beginning, we can formulate a more user-friendly answer. But in the middle, we still don't know how, and we still don't see how an LLM could replace a system like KBQA.
Yeah. I think that's exciting research. I think it's becoming more relevant, actually.
Yeah.
So,
if I could just add that, yes, that approach that you're describing is something we do quite a lot with at the moment. It's using the right tool for the right job. Can't just trust the LLM. but it can really help with generating the queries and in formulating the knowledge graph. So it has a role to play. The knowledge graph will reduce the search space and the context for the LLM. So there's a paper out there called Graph RAG, as in the RAG approach. RAG is very popular, but Graph RAG is better. And there were newer approaches even since then, but the concept of using the two together and controlling your hallucinations works quite well for us. Great
comment. Okay, I would like to move on to the next talk on the DAECO ontology project. And there, we talked yesterday a lot about barriers for entry or for acceptance of blockchain technology in the construction industry. So Pablo, what do you think would need to be in place for adoption of the DAECO ontology? So do we need tool support? Do we need a certain maturity? Do we need to illustrate value? What do you see is the way into adopting DAECO ontology on a more broader basis?
So the first real step really is that you need to create an ontology that the community is aware of. Otherwise, just because it comes out of the blue, you really need to have that engagement from the very conceptual stage to make sure that the right people give you feedback to the right stage of the ontology development. Otherwise, you run into the problem in which you may not represent knowledge in the way that is actually useful for people to use, which is the main challenge usually for ontology models. So having any communities really that engage with both domains, really the construction side, but also the blockchain side. And that's why I think the CBC is probably in a good position for that, is to engage in the right people at the right moment to make sure that everybody is aware that this is happening. So there's a definitely powerful community engagement part that plays a role into whether an ontology is being used or not. And then from that engagement comes the applicability and the usefulness of the ontology itself. Because in the end, we believe that the knowledge is there for grabs. It's just we need to spend the time and make sure that the right people actually are able to provide that output into the ontology so that it represents exactly what we need to represent.
Could you mentioned in the presentation, but could you, like in one or two sentences, formulate the value statement, the value proposition of the ontology?
So the value really is we want to formalize in a way when you want to create a blockchain application for the AEC sector, we want to formulate a way in which we can describe or we can basically state the system itself that we're trying to propose. And if we look at, or basically what the initial discussions were about, is that there is a lot of ways in which we can describe a blockchain application. There is a lot of different ontologies that describe what the built environment actually is, but there's nothing really that ties it together. And when you try to create something that is in blockchain, for any application in the built environment, there is this disconnection that exists between how we identify and how we define things that we are aiming to solve. Or maybe not aiming to solve, but at least to formalize and rationalize, to see exactly what are the key relationships that exist between the development of blockchain applications and the built environment, so that when you're trying to create a new one, you can base yourself into this type of ontology to say, well, I'm rationalizing that this is my way of creating the blockchain because this is exactly the application that I'm going to do based on prior use cases or based on prior knowledge that exists, so that you don't really have to start from scratch, if you will, which is what we feel like it happens a lot. And I think Niall has this amazing chart that explains everything, that for the same use case, there's 27 different solutions. So we're trying to see what exactly are the small differences that exist between those types of applications and why some of them make sense and some of them don't. That is what we're trying to see from a knowledge perspective, not as much from the business case, but from a knowledge perspective, that's exactly what we're trying to formalize.
Thanks.
Dirk, I can add to that, and thank you, Pablo. But in the sense that we do have a lot of technology ontologies for the many technologies we use in the construction industry and nascent technologies. But one of the, I think, value premises of DICO is to map out or to model the business architecture around blockchain applications for the construction sector. So if you think about enterprise lifecycle, when you start to architect your vision and business, to then architect your information and data and eventually pick the technologies or develop the technologies, what we see missing greatly from the work we've seen presented in the CBC is the business architecture and how you can have an ontology that will assist that. It will have to interface with technology and information architectures, but that business architecture, how we can map out what is of value for a particular business application, it's something that is not very well understood. So I think one of the aims of the ontology is to understand that level in the enterprise lifecycle. So I'm just adding to what Pablo said, because I think that's quite key.
Yeah, thank you, Abel. I think staying close to value creation is a good aim. And it's an interesting project, and I'm excited to see how this develops, and hopefully it finds great use cases. Okay, then I have a question also to the last speaker, Niall, who talked about smart contracts. So first, a clarification, and maybe this is sort of a segue over to my next question on ontologies. Could you just very briefly explain the difference between smart contracts and smart legal contracts?
Yes, we've had quite a few sessions around this in previous years as well, so I didn't want to kind of revisit all of that. Conscious Gavin is really the legal expert on here. So when I refer to it, I'm talking about there's an area of research called computational contracts. So Stanford very much leading the way on this. And I was giving a talk on this recently, and a guy came up to me and spoke to me and said, started asking some questions, and I found out it was Ian Grigg who coined the term Ricardian contract. So yes, there's lots of different definitions around this, but smart legal contract, human and machine readable, legally enforceable. So in the UK, there's a Smarter Contracts report, which some of you may be aware of, looking at what is legally enforceable. A smart contract can be legally enforceable as part of a smart legal contract. However, it has to be, well, there's about 6 different criteria that it has to conform to, and many smart contracts don't do that. So it has to be able to be paused, upgraded, which many immutable smart contracts are not. It has to have a governing law associated with it, dispute resolution processes, various legal criteria that are in there, and your average Solidity contract does not have that. So what we have is a very legal facing, as in looks like a legal agreement. There are defined terms. There's an ontology for that. You can add and map different data models, and it'd be fantastic to look at how we can map our standards-based modeling language, which we use a lot of AI and knowledge graphs actually to help to enrich rather than writing it by hand. So we have the contract, the clauses within that. We aim for as many reusable clauses as possible that are tested, validated, can be formally verified in some cases. And then the clause execution can execute, but that can execute completely on an AWS environment and a Lambda function, a local JavaScript function, or if you wish, completely on chain in Solidity, or using any of the sort of platforms I've mentioned. Not any of them. I've only built on about 3 of them at the moment. So complete flexibility in execution, but there is a difference between the two. So smart contract can form part of the solution, but not necessarily be the same thing. So a very broad definition.
Yes, yes.
So
So I see there's a lot more going on there, and a lot more to explain. But you already kind of went into answering my next question on ontologies. So what would be the potential role of ontologies in smart contracts or smart legal contracts, and how could you see contract management, milestone verification, payment automation? So all these processes could be supported with that.
We certainly can't have a contract unless you have some definition of what you're contracting about. So they form a huge part of this. So for example, talk about payments, ISDA for around in the finance sector around credit defaults, etc., and looking at more financial terms, they have their own ontology. We've mapped that over to the Accord project, which is the smart legal contract open source project that I'm working with. So we've crowdsourced quite a number of these. We're using AI to help to improve this. So we try to implement in our model definitions whatever ontology and whatever taxonomy exists out there. So we map that over, then we can start to reason with that in contracts and link our variables inside a contract to a thing that's quite defined. And then our executable logic then references what was defined in that model. So it's absolutely crucial. We have to have a very clear definition of what the contract is talking about, and the units, the validation rules down to a very, very specific level, which you only really get if you have a very formal representation of your ontology. So
would the ACO ontology be a candidate for playing a role in smart contracts?
I'll have to look at it a little bit further, but it's certainly on the surface of what I've seen, it looks like it would be a very good candidate for it indeed. You're using the right types of technologies to implement this. So it would be a bit of effort to port it over. As I said, the AI helps with that. And in Fractal, that's what we're doing a lot of, using AI to create our knowledge graphs, etc. So moving it from that definition into a knowledge graph into the model format that's used by the Accord project. It's a kind of a 2-3-step process, and then implementing that again in whatever language it would run on or off chain or in this hybrid solution. So it's not a straightforward process, but it's definitely doable.
It's an avenue to be explored. Thanks a lot to everyone for this great discussion session. Yes, of course.
That's something really quickly, Niall. So is the ontologies you are creating and the things you're looking to, are they compliant with any other ISO ontologies, top-level ontologies, or they are very bespoke to the exercise you're developing?
Yeah, it's just a tool like anything else. I'm trying to think. The ISDA is the one that's most compliant. Again, finance, payment, release use cases, these types of things, late penalties, but highly applicable to other sectors. We've spoken previously about other uses in supply chain for contractors finishing their job, and then payment release for NEC contracts, JCT, etc. So it's just mapping those domains into it. So yes, there's nothing specific that would prevent that.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, then I think we can conclude this session.